Hello, I'm Scot, Conway, PhD, JD, 8th degree black belt. If you listen to my programs, you hear that a lot. I'm here with a Language of Emotions lesson out of Language of Emotions 101A and 101B. Emotional IQ is my book. I'm going to talk to you about a concept called validate and lead. Now, this is a way you use the language of emotions to have conversations and understand people. Now, we talked about how you talk about feelings without talking about feelings. This is how you use your understanding of the language of emotions at a 2% level, top 2%, genius level application of the language of emotions. We'll take a simple one, anger. If someone is expressing anger, they could be obviously angry. They could be yelling, screaming, clenching their fists and look like they're ready to hit somebody. That they're obviously upset. Well, what have I learned? If I am a master of emotion, if I understand the language of emotions, I know anger means a broken rule, that they perceive that a rule of theirs has been broken. So rather than argue, well, there's nothing to be angry with, don't you get angry? Does that ever work? Really. However, if we can diagnose the situation, and all we need is some information. Just as a practicing human being, you don't need to be a psychologist or a therapist or a pastoral counselor or someone who does extensive coaching and mentoring. You just know. Language of emotion says anger is a broken rule. Well, let's find out what the rule is and how it was broken. So when someone's expressing their anger, you let them vent for a little while. Now, what I do with intense emotion is I kind of let people do what I call run the circle once. I consider running that circle once to be venting. It kind of gets it off of their chest. Once they start through a second time, now I consider that looping. Now they're just kind of sort of digging their own trench and they're making it more real to them. But I'll try to find out from them, well, what happened? And very often they'll tell me their interpretation of what happened. They can include the information of exactly what the rule is. So suppose someone came in, well, I can't believe he was so disrespectful. Ugh. So, okay, well, whatever happened, event-wise, their rule was that someone was very disrespectful. And they have a rule clearly that says that whoever this was ought to respect them. So I know already a little bit about what the rule is. So, well, what did they do? Now, they might loop on their interpretation. Well, they're just so disrespectful. Okay, well, that's going back to the rule again. Well, you want to know what actually happened. You say, well, I understand they were really disrespectful. But what exactly did they do? I wasn't there, so I didn't see it. If I'd been there, what would I have seen? And when you ask questions like that, what would I have seen? What did that sound like? So I want to get a picture in my head so that I can understand what you're telling me. And any expression of that kind of idea can very often elicit what happened. So in this particular case that I have in my mind, it's from a counseling session I did with a couple. And finally she was able to get to that place where she's like, well, he was on the phone with his son and totally ignored me. And so, okay, so what was the situation here? And there was a phone call. Okay, I think I'm beginning to put this together. And I've got more of the information, more of the details, until I could put a picture together in my head and understand what exactly she was talking about. Now, to me, honestly, it didn't seem like it was all that disrespectful. And so what we were able to do then is introduce some more definitions. And I talk about this in holographic emotions definitions, how you change definitions and such. But what I was able to help her do is adjust her rule a little bit. Because when you're having the conversation, just, well, that's just nothing to be angry about. What you just told them is your rule's invalid, your interpretation of what happened is invalid, and you should just let that happen again and be happy about it. Well, people don't generally like that, and they won't really change their point of view. Sometimes you don't need to change their point of view. You just want to understand. And you can see how someone in a relationship would expect to have someone show them respect. Now, if you hear the story and you begin to realize, yeah, that was really disrespectful. Because it turned out what the guy said on the phone to his son is, I'm totally listening. No, I'm completely ignoring her. I'm listening to you. I don't care what she said. I only care what you said. Okay, well, that's getting a little bit disrespectful. So we can understand that. And so the problem is him actively ignoring her, refusing to listen, refusing to have her have any impact on the conversation when she's right there. And to tell someone to their face, I'm ignoring you, can be very disrespectful to them and lets you understand. Well, ultimately, you want to get someone to be able to lead their way through the emotion because we know language of emotions. Anger is a negative emotion. Negative emotions are emotions of change. That means something must change. And so when you hear that something must change, then you need to find out, so what exactly needs to change? And you can continue that very conversationally. So when she's expressing her anger, and anger being disrespected, then the next question is, well, how do you think he sees it? Do you think he realizes how disrespectful he was? So what? It was perfectly obvious. Like, well, I know it's obvious to you, it's obvious to me. I'm not 100% sure that he can even see it. I think he was probably so preoccupied with whatever he was talking to his son about, they had no idea that he's basically telling you to your face that he's completely ignoring you. I mean, I don't know what the conversation was about, but I would like to think that maybe he just wasn't thinking about it, that he cares about you, he values you, at least I would hope he values you. Is there something in here you think that, maybe needs to be brought to his attention? Because, I don't know, I mean, if he's going to do stuff like that, that sounds like he might be a little bit clueless, at least on this particular subject to me. I mean, does it look that way to you? Now, notice how I'm setting that up. Because I understand anger is a broken rule. I understand that she wants to impose her rule by force. That's that anger coming out. But what we need to do is get his cooperation, get his insight and his understanding as to how things played out and how things can be done differently. And what we were able to work out is a way to have the conversation so that he could understand. And I could ask her in this particular case, it played out a little differently because I had both of them there, but I could ask her in this particular case. Now, if you just told him that he was disrespectful, do you think he would agree? Well, in this case, I already knew they didn't agree because they'd been sitting down with me going, I'll tell mom, or counselor in this case. And one of the things that I needed her to understand is, so how can we get him to see it? And what I actually did is we came up with a different term. Rather than just respect and disrespect, we said, okay, respect is going to be lift up a person. Obviously, he didn't do that. He should have, but he didn't. We're going to call disrespect as a put down a person. And, I don't know that he'll agree that he did that. I think that's where you're fighting, is you're saying he did disrespect you, he's saying it. How about we'll take a third term, we'll shove a third term in here called a lack of respect. That's when he has an obligation, because he's in this romantic relationship with you, an obligation to be lifting you up. And he didn't. Well, he agreed to that one immediately. So, okay, well, now we have an agreement on something. The beginning of the agreement starts the solution. So instead of fighting, with her saying, you did this, and him saying, I did not do that, how close to a solution are they? Nowhere near a solution. All they had managed to do between the event happening and when they had their session with me was fight about what happened. Factually, they had agreed on the events. When they told me the story, they both agreed on the events. It was the interpretation of the event they fought over. He didn't feel like he was putting her down. She did. But she was willing to agree, okay, well, he didn't respect me. He showed a lack of respect. And he was willing to agree to that. And we worked out a strategy on how you could do that better. And you can do that without ever mentioning anger. You don't have to talk about the anger. You don't have to talk about the feelings. You can talk about the rule, how it was broken, how it can be resolved, and how it can be followed in the future. So what you're looking for is to validate somebody's feelings. Validate, validate, validate. So whenever I'm dealing with anyone in an intense situation, I don't say, well, there's nothing to be angry about. You told me what you did. I don't see what you're so upset about. Now I'm just the enemy. Now she has to prove why it's okay for her to be upset, or she'll just shut down and stop talking to me, and she'll go talk to someone else who will listen and understand what a jerk he was being. So when you're having a discussion about something intensely emotional with someone who is intensely emotional, you always validate their feeling. Now, you may disagree with the rule. You can say, wow, yeah, if something like that happened to me and I felt like someone did something that was so important to me and they behaved totally against that, I'd be upset too. Now, notice, none of that actually agrees with anything that they said, other than at a principle level that essentially says, yeah, if I had a rule and it got broken, I'd be angry. Because it's true. That's what anger is. And even if you think someone's being ridiculous, you can do that. When you validate someone, you become someone on their side. And so now it's the two of you together against the problem. Now, in a romantic relationship, this is even more important. Because is your partner or your opponent? When we get angry at each other, we tend to come at each other and we tend to act like opponents. We want to be on the same side. So if we can get on the same side, if I can come around on her side and agree with her, she can come around on my side and agree with me, and agree, well, yes, I see that you're upset. Obviously, if you're upset, there must be a really good reason for it, and I would like to know more of what that is. And they can express to you. Now, sometimes they'll do the same thing the woman did. She was very conclusion-oriented. Well, you were just totally disrespectful. I talked to her husband one time, and she completely emasculated me in front of my friends. Well, I had no picture in my head of what exactly she had done. And once we got past the intensity and let him kind of do the circle once to vent, found out exactly what she had done and exactly how she had done it and how it could have been handled better in his point of view. And because I validated his feelings, well, yeah, my wife is completely emasculating me in front of my friends, I'd be upset about that too, because I would. Now, what it takes to constitute that to me, I'm not really sure personally, because it's never actually happened to me. Nothing's risen to that level to me, but this thing did to him. As it unfolded, we got into what it should look like and what it actually did look like. He actually volunteered himself, well, okay, well, I could be overreacting to this. Well, that was the beginning of him coming down, realizing, okay, yes, I have this rule. Yeah, that's a pretty decent rule, but, now look at it, maybe that didn't quite rise up to the level of violating that rule. In the moment, I felt like it did, but now that I'm looking at it, yeah, I guess things don't really need to be different. Maybe I just need to do something about what I put in that category. I thought that was brilliant, that he was beginning to bring himself down off the emotion and beginning to install a solution himself. A solution someone comes up with on their own, something that they think of in their own head. They're much more likely to follow than something imposed upon them on the outside. So there's a couple of things on how you deal with intense emotion. You validate and then you lead. You use your understanding of the language of emotions to understand what's going on and have the discussion using the pieces of the definition to pull out the information that you need. And sometimes, as in the last gentleman's case, he brought himself down when he realized, once he explained what violated his rule, that, well, maybe that didn't really violate my rule. And he brought himself down. In the case of the woman, what he did violate her rule. Well, the solution to anger is effective communication. So if she doesn't need to change her rule, then she needs to effectively communicate. And so I was able to help her figure out, how do you effectively communicate from here so that you can get your rule followed. Just a direct attack and accusation very often has the opposite effect. It tends to tear apart relationship. And being able to have the discussion effectively to present it so that he can come up with some ideas himself. And as he came up with the ideas himself, he's more willing to be accountable to those ideas. Why? Because they're his ideas. It's hard to argue with your own idea. So there's a couple of thoughts on how you deal with people in the middle of intense emotions using the language of emotions. This is Scot, Conway, PhD, JD, 8th degree black belt, the teacher in Language of Emotions 101A and 101B, and the author of Emotional IQ. We hope this lesson has helped you as you continue your quest to be an emotional genius. Top 2% on the scale of emotional intelligence. Thank you, and we'll see you for the next video.